Good morning, everyone. My name is Maciej Grodzicki, and I'm the chair of the. I'm not sure why the platform is. Okay, so I was just beginning to say that over a year and a half ago, with a group of circa 40 researchers from diverse disciplines and universities in Poland, we prepared a Polish manifesto of regeneration, in which we postulated diverse actions in the Polish context for the pandemic. We treated the public health as the primary concern. We postulated more solidarity and social justice and transformation towards socio-ecological balance in the economy. I will share the link to the manifesto for those interested in chat. It was signed by nearly 500 people from academia and beyond, and was covered by national media, and later on it developed into an association, the so-called Polish Economic Network. And now this year and a half, both in Poland and worldwide, was the time of battles, in which we as academics were only indirectly involved. Many topics emerged, especially in the workers' movement. First about the lockdown and income support, then a bit later about terms of return to work and how to provide security to workers. Later on, in terms of the composition of recovery packages, and at the moment, for instance, the workers are fighting how to tackle the supply chain disruptions and planned layoffs. And the battles are fought on many fronts. There are individual strategies of workers, there are union and organizations in the workplace or in the streets, but also in terms of parliamentary involvement. And what quickly emerged in our discussion, but also in the workers' movement, is the very ambiguous view of what government is doing. Officially, they provide support towards the workers and broader to society in terms of diverse rescue fiscal packages. But there are actually many tensions, multiple tensions between these policies, their actual composition, and workers' expectations, but also workers' strategies. What government's doing is often contradictory to these expectations and to the, but also to the workplace democracy. So today we meet in a group of workers' activists and scientists to discuss the lessons from 2020-21 in this particular field. So let me introduce the four speakers in the order of their appearance. So first we have Anna Marjankowska, who is an independent labor organizer, care sector worker based in Reykjavik in Iceland, member of board of Efling General Union in 2018 and 19, and at the moment member of the board. She was also member of the board of Heimssamband. Sorry if I'm if I'm pronouncing it.
It's just ISC. It's Confederation of Labor in Iceland.
Thank you, Anna. And for the moment, she's involved in. Maybe you will pronounce it as well again.
Yeah, it's a branch of IWW. It's a branch of Industrial Workers of the World in Iceland.
Thank you. Then we have Michał Sobol, member of General Commission of Polish Union, Independent Union Inicjatywa Pracownicza. He is a lawyer and active participant of Legal Affairs Group of the Union, also co-founder of the group. As a trade union lawyer, he represents employees in labor, social insurance cases, supports trade union committees, provides legal advice, and participates in negotiations. We have Daria Bogdanska, trade union activist and negotiator in the Swedish trade union SACS, consultant and analyst in matters relating to labor law and the rights of economic migrants. She is also a journalist and writer. And finally, we have Karol Muszyński, a postdoctoral researcher at Center for Sociological Research at KU Leuven in the ERC-funded project Respect Me. He holds PhD in law from Warsaw University, where he was previously an assistant professor. In the past, he completed a project on a post-crisis labor law in policy in Poland. is primarily interested in non-standard employment violations and circumventions of labor law and industrial relations. So as you see, we have 4 Polish speakers, but they are based in very diverse countries and associations. And quickly, how the panel will be organized. First, I will give each of the speakers time for an opening speech, and then we will have first Q&A round. So if you have any questions to the speakers, please raise your hand or write it in the chat. Also, I will have my own questions if there's no activity in the audience. And finally, we'll have a second round of Q&A and summary of the panel. Well, yeah, I think we can commence at the moment. I encouraged all of you in the audience to be active in taking the questions. So first, Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'm connecting. Please excuse all my chaotic speech and maybe some information you will have to find out later in the questions if I am missing something, because it's super early in here and I had to wake up at 6 in the morning to connect with you. So I was thinking about making some general picture of how everything works in Iceland and why it's so specific. And then I will go to the interventions from the government on how to help workers during the COVID time. First of all, I would like to ask you to forget everything that you ever heard about Iceland. Because probably you've heard that Iceland locked in prison all the bankers from the crisis from 2008, 2009. And this is not true. You probably heard that Iceland is a socialist country that protects their workers with strong labor unions. This is not true. So 92% of workers statistically is unionized in Iceland, but that doesn't mean that they are organized. So if you are coming to Iceland to work and you start some work in particular branch, you are signed up to the union based on the job that you are doing, or if you are living in a countryside, this is you are signed up locally to some particular unions. And there is a group of unions that are organized in the countrysides and is SGS, Confederation. And we've got unions that are assigned to some branches. So if you are a basic worker, like working as a driver or as a housekeeper, as a cleaner, as a kindergarten assistant, you probably will be signed up to Efling Union, which is general union in Iceland, for the lower wage workers. And if you are working in the office, if you are a lower manager or a programmer, you will be signed up to VAVER. And if we are living in Reykjavik, the situation is easy. You are in Efling. If you are lower paid worker, you are in VAVER. If you are better paid worker, if you are working in care sector or as a specialized workers, there are a few other unions, but in general, there is not much of a mess in here. If you are a migrant worker, you probably work with Efling and paying fees to the union. So the fee to the union is obligatory. So sometimes workers are learning which union they are in just based on the payslip and percentage of their income given to some particular union. And it's not like you can choose something. Maybe you can choose your union or not to pay it when you are a freelancer. And then we are talking about this 8% that are not unionized. They also don't have a legal help people who are not in any union, or they don't have access to particular services. And unions in Iceland have a long tradition. That means also that they are having different functions. They are not very active. Unions are present in people's life, but more like providers of summer houses. It's a thing in here. And mostly you can get a discount for sport activities, some refunds for spending free time, and access to summer houses. So yeah, we've got all those unions: WAWER, EPLING, SGS as a confederation of country unions, some other unions, and they are under umbrella of ASI, the Confederation of Labor in Iceland. And this is an organization that is going into negotiations with ESA, Confederation of Employers, and government if they are discussing general agreements. And if we are moving to COVID times, I would say that Icelandic workers were not in the worst possible position, because we've got kind of a freshly negotiated general agreements from 2019. So for me, that means that there is a promise of rise of income, of particular services, shortening work week that is happening every year, every few months, according to general agreements that we negotiated using the biggest strike since 1984. Around 3,000 people were put into strike in 2019, and that was the leverage that made us get better wages and better working conditions for workers. We made a compromise as militant workers, as people active in the unions, to agree on lower wages, because in our statement, our goal was to meet the living minimum wage, which was counted by sociologists and economists. And in Icelandic kronas, I know that it's not clear for users of different currencies. But living minimum wage should be 425 kronas, for 425,000 kronas. And the general agreement stopped with the rises next year up to 380,000 kronas before the taxes. So if you cut, it's around 3,500 euros per month in the end. So this is the background. And now I'm gonna say something about governmental interventions in COVID. So Iceland is a country that was kind of prepared for a crisis, or lived through it already in 2008 and 2009, and the collapse of the economy and labor market here was just immense. So everybody was kind of expecting that something like that is going to happen. Maybe they were hoping that not, but if you have a country that is completely based on income from tourism and cod, which is like fish industry and tourism, this is not enough to protect people from being unemployed from time to time if a crisis like that is coming. So the COVID started, first lockdowns were implemented, and of course there was less and less tourists because of economical crisis everywhere else. Iceland is extremely expensive to travel to, and less tourists start coming. Of course, that means layoffs in all the gastronomy branch and tourism, all cleaning sector. Everything was very hectic, and I was analyzing unemployment rates in the past months, and there is an immense response in the changes of unemployment after government was introducing next solutions. So first solution for the crisis was that government will pay 75% of people's wages. So that was a support for employers, and the money went to employers, not directly to the workers. And as you can imagine, what happened is that people should have their work time reduced, so the shifts are changing and people are more protected from being infected. But what happened in fact, it was people were still working 100%, employer was paying 25% of the wages, and government was paying up the 75%. And maybe that would be a good idea to keep the jobs, not to reduce the jobs in the perspective of a country. But then government decided to pay not only for the wages to protect the jobs, but also for the notice period. So if somebody wants to lay off their workers, they have to wait 3 months, or according to the contracts, like one month or 3 months, and government decided to pay up 75% for the people to be fired later. That wasn't a very good idea.
Anna, if you could just slowly finish.
Yep. Okay, so we've got this, and we've got in here. Okay, what is important is decrease in the services. We have a crisis, mass layoffs, everybody is in panic, and services like unions and unemployment office, they slowly stop to function, and they are like, everybody is working in remote mode, so you cannot meet your representative from the union. Nobody is protected at the workplace because the office workers are not coming to the workplaces, and you cannot call providers of unemployment benefits because the line is always busy. So that's gonna be it. Maybe I will clear up something in the questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And now we turn to Michał Sobol from Polish Workers Union.
Yes, thank you, but let me first show you my presentation. Oh. Okay, this works.
Yes.
Okay, so good morning again. My name is Michał Sobol. I'm, as Maciej said before, I'm a member of trade union Inicjatywa Pracownicza Workers Initiative from Poland. I'm also a lawyer. I'm a member of a law group in our union. And I will try to say you something about experience of my union. I think that's experience of weak state support. But firstly, let me show you something about our union. We are small trade union with an anarcho-syndicalist background. We are not a representative trade union as defined as by the national legislation, but we can pride ourselves on being the largest trade union in some workplaces. We try to reach out to workplaces that are key to the functioning of today's economy, like logistics or automotive sector. And that's why you might hear about our interventions when it comes to the cases like Amazon or Volkswagen. And as I said before, I will try to say something about our experience from the first wave of pandemic. And from the very beginning, the pandemic, we have looked at it through the perspective of risk for laborers. I therefore think that the discussion on interventionism versus workplace democracy should be based on the problems that have arisen during the pandemic. So I will try to focus on the major issues of this time. So the first issue was the health and safety. Government has not introduced any additional legislation that would force employers to comply with increased sanitation terms. Also, in the beginning, some employers were not able to guarantee any personal hygiene measures, such as masks, such as you can see, disinfectant gels. Trade unions have been forced to enforce these under binding labor laws, like for example, labor code in Poland. But however, that was sometimes not enough. So that's why some of our committees of our union have demanded work stoppage in their workplaces, like for example, in Amazon. Second issue was fear of unemployment by everyone else. We were really shocked from the very beginning by the news of expected high unemployment. Finally, there were no major redundancies in the unionized sectors, but redundancies reached workers on civil law contracts and temporary workers. And unemployment in Poland was one of the lowest in Europe. Redundancies that we expected during the pandemic were mostly related to previous announced process, for example, the process of outsourcing or offshoring, like incorporation branches. And the third issue during the first wave of the pandemic was the standardizations of working conditions. During the pandemic, many employers did not achieve their planned profits, as you know. That's why, using the atmosphere of panic, they forced through legal changes favorable to them. The legal acts that regulated these issues were called crisis shields, as you can see at this slide, tarcza antykryzysowa in Poland. Thanks to these laws, entrepreneurs could receive all kinds of financial support depending on certain conditions, and some of them were related to employment. one of the conditions for receiving that financial support was the collective agreement with trade union about reducing wages or reducing working hours, but without a benefit for wages. However, unlike some support methods, this solution did not assume the job protection. And indeed, many trade unions have signed such agreements without demanded anything in return. In contact with our trade union committees, we successfully warned the workers that entrepreneurs have been trying to reduce wages or reduction working hours. And in workplaces of our committees which decided to sign agreements, our committees negotiated long-term job guarantees. But most of them did not sign these agreements. Major factors that impacted working conditions were suspension of labor inspection checks, removing the obligation for occupational health examinations, and the implementation of remote working into the legal system. And I think that all these factors have forced the trade unions to take additional action to defend existing working conditions. And the sad lesson from the time of pandemic is that the financial intervention is not enough by itself for fair economy. So that's why we need democratic participation. And as you can see, and that slide, we tried to show the profits, which was not achieved by the employers. As you can see at the third slide, that is the example of Volkswagen, of our committee for Volkswagen, that show the millions of profits, but they did not secure health and safety conditions inside the workplace. And as you can see on the left side, our committee from the Avon, they...
yes. Michał, I'm sorry. Michał, your slides are not moving.
But what you are see right now? Wait.
We can see only the first slide.
Inicjatywa Pracownicza.
Yeah, like the presentation wasn't running at all, but you can just continue because we kind of know about the Volkswagen case, or people can Google it later, or you can send the presentation maybe.
I don't know really how to fix it. Sorry. So maybe let's start with another presentation, and I will try to send it at the chat if it's okay for you.
Okay, is it all from you, Michał? Because
yes,
I had some technical problems on my. I'm not sure if it's the platform or my or my internet connection or something. Thanks a lot. Hope you can refer to your slides later in the Q&A session. So now we move to Daria, who is based in Sweden. So about Swedish experience.
Yes. Hi again. Well, I will try to do it fast. But before before I tell how it went with Corona, maybe I'll tell you just a little bit about a Swedish labor system. Well, Sweden and a few other Scandinavian countries have a system that's called the Scandinavian model, or in Sweden it's called the Swedish model, which first is important to know that all the labor law regulations, it's mostly regulated in a collective agreement. Of course, we have a labor law also, but the idea is that it's it's the workers' organizations and employers' organizations that decide things together in the negotiations, and then decide how they're going to run the labor market in collective agreements. So there is a well, officially, there is not supposed to be so much state intervention in regulating the labor market, and this is the whole idea of the model, which and as a effect of that, Sweden doesn't, for example, doesn't have minimum wages. The minimum wages are set in collective agreements and are not generally applied to every workplace. So in theory, it's also legal to not have minimum wages in a workplace. And this is also connected to also the way the unemployment insurances work in Sweden. So unemployment office doesn't pay out directly unemployment benefits normally. Every bigger union have their own unemployment insurance organization, and it's also member based. So a member pays fees to the insurance and then receives 80% of the income for every unemployment day. So having a system like that, it's very good in many ways, because it's more controlled by the workers' organizations than the state. But it builds on a big participation. And here we come to a question which has been relevant in Corona, and also in for me, who work with migrant workers. It's that this system is built quite a lot on full union membership of the whole workforce and quite regular employment forms. So full-time fixed contracts. And what happened during Corona pandemic was that it was very, very apparent that this system is not really it fits to the problems of today's work market and how it's instability. So the first problem was for sure the irregular employment forms. That many of the workers who found themselves unemployed didn't actually qualify for the unemployment insurances that have quite high standards. You have to be a member. You have to be a member for a year, and you have to be working for a year. And also you have to work a minimum 50%. So that was the first problem. And when we come to migrants, we who work with migrants in the unions, we found no real difference actually from what it was before, because migrants were in crisis constantly before the pandemics. So it was nothing new. But what happened is that the state intervention in this case was to actually make the union-run insurance organizations lower their qualification requirements to be eligible to the insurance, which actually opened a lot of social economical security to a broader amount of workers, and with both Swedish and migrants. So in that way, it was something positive. The crisis had a positive effect on migrants who've been, and many other irregular workers who've been excluded from the work market. And another paradox, maybe many can see when it comes to migrant workers, it in some way even strengthened their position. since the limitation on free movement within the borders, especially within the EU, some of the workers were not easily replaceable as they usually are, which in a bit strengthened their positions. So that was something that I found very interesting in this crisis, and we can talk about it more. But it was very surprising in many ways how this developed.
Is it all, Daria?
Yeah, I think to begin with, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, so far we've heard three perspectives of union activists from different countries, and now we turn to Karol, who is a researcher, so perhaps a bit different perspective from the research side.
So thanks a lot. It's an honor also to be here among trade union activists, me as a scholar. So I studied platform workers during COVID-19, working both on online platforms, so workers such as IT workers or graphic designers, translators, and on offline platforms like food delivery, couriers, and care workers. But I will try to say something more comprehensive about the situation of non-standard workers and non-standard employment in general during COVID. This, of course, differs from country to country, but we know that non-standard employment is on the rise in the recent years, and that new forms of employment are crowding out standard employment. We also know that so far trade unions have not found a viable way to organize and represent non-standard workers. This is a problem, as pandemic is likely to further increase the importance and extent of non-standard employment for numerous reasons. First reason is that while unemployment is on the rise, non-standard employment, such as the one offered by labor platforms, can offer some employment opportunities. What we found during our study is that a substantial part of our respondents in the platform economy were workers who were dismissed from the traditional economy. We don't have any results of quantitative survey yet, which we will undertake, but just to give you some insights from qualitative part of our survey, in Poland, 13 out of 32, so over 1/3 of all respondents, were persons fired either slightly before or during COVID, who were not able to find jobs in the traditional economy and resorted to labor platforms. This included not only HoReCa workers switching to food delivery, for instance, but also language teachers searching for translation jobs while schools were closed, or even IT workers. Labor platforms offer such workers some jobs, but without protection pertaining to standard employment, in conditions where they are hard to organize and represent. Second reason for the growing incidence of non-standard employment is that pandemic is likely to further normalize the non-standard forms of employment in our economies. Digital outsourcing will be accelerated as companies adopt more remote work and more task-based work organization. As much as we can bring back manufacturing into the realm of national regulation, for instance, via product market regulation or intensified investments in infrastructure, it is very difficult to imagine such movements with regard to service sector. As a result, we can expect service sector to become even more standardized in the future. Thirdly, impact of the pandemic relates to the power structure and power struggles. Before the pandemic, there was an increasing pressure to put restrictions on big companies utilizing regulatory loopholes to circumvent employment regulation. After the pandemic, however, companies based upon non-standard organization of labor have sort of won the public debate for recognition. I here think primarily of platforms, both labor platforms such as Uber Eats, Delivery, Takeaway, and marketplace platforms such as Amazon, whose power now rely not only upon the capital that they have gathered, but also upon the fact that they provide necessary infrastructure for the functioning of COVID-19 economy, and are thus unlikely to be targeted by any substantial regulation. Platforms have won the sympathy of customers and policymakers who are unlikely to support any substantial regulation that targets them and prevents the harmful impact that such platforms have for the employment conditions. As a result of such developments, which basically come down to embedding of non-standard employment within our societies, governments are starting to regulate position of non-standard workers without the intermediation of trade unions. This is a phenomenon that we had seen in the past. Even before the pandemic, in many countries, policymakers were actively working to improve working conditions of non-standard workers, while trade unions struggled to organize and represent them. But pandemic has brought such problems to new levels. Limited access to social security and health insurance of non-standard employees ceased to be perceived as an individual problem and has become a problem of public health, thus requiring necessary steps. Limited access to unemployment benefits ceased to be, again, an individual problem and has become a pending economic issue, and provision of income support has been seen as an element of maintaining productive capacities for the post-COVID recovery. We see governments adopting specific solutions to help non-standard employees, which basically regularize or normalize such forms of employment, bringing it closer to standard employment. But this does not come with a cost, as such improvements are, first problem, not necessarily coming from trade union pressure, which undermines power of trade unions as organizations representing the workers, and secondly, not leading to actual standardization of such employment. This rather improves situation of workers who are at the same time in position where they are difficult to organize and represent, and sometimes even ideologically opposed to trade unions, such groups, freelancers, for instance. Whether this ideological opposition is orchestrated or not, or real, is yet another issue. So the perspectives for trade unions are even more green than before, as we have a combination of two developments. One is increased and growing incidence of non-standard employment and many factors that are likely to even further accelerate this process. And second development is that policymakers are essentially replacing trade unions in terms of protecting such workers, while being subject to the pressure from the general public to avoid any stronger regulation of platforms who have become key actors in the functioning of post-COVID economy. This threatens not only the most precarious non-standard workers, but also the power of trade unions in the future. And that's all. Thank you.
Great, Karol. Thank you very much. So we have the round of opening speeches behind us, and now it's time for first round of Q&A. So feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions to any of the speakers, or use the Q&A box to pose your questions. I do hope we will have some discussion. If not, I have some questions prepared, but I would like to give you the occasion. Okay, if not, then maybe perhaps any of the speakers would like to comment on another person, or maybe you have some questions to each other, or you found some inspirations in other persons' speeches. Daria, yes, please.
Yeah, I have a question to Karol. Karol, did you, in your research, and I don't know how broadly you research, but did you see any of the legal regulations, especially in Europe, that actually improved platform workers and non-standard employment workers access to social security, especially during the pandemics, or any specific actions have been taken that place on the legislation level within Europe?
It depends on how you actually understand social security, right? Because even I can give you even a Polish example, right? We had civil law contractors gaining access to quasi-unemployment benefits. Yeah, there are actually numerous examples of such policies. I co-authored a report for ETUI on the position of creative workers in freelancers in creative industries, and there's actually an overview of support measures that were adopted, and I believe that we have reviewed 8 countries. And there are numerous examples of such policies, actually, which were basically temporary, but yeah, well, we did. So the review was updated for December 2020, if I remember correctly, and we have not updated it yet. But I can expect that some of the measures are still in place, actually. So there are really numerous examples of that. Not only, let's say, things that are typically aimed at entrepreneurs, such as deferrals of social security contributions, but also very employee-like access to quasi-unemployment benefits, to sick leave, and so on and so forth. So I can send you a link and you can take a look at that.
Anna, yes, please.
Yeah, I've got a question to Daria because, or maybe not a question, but a proposal for discussion, and maybe we won't solve anything in here, just it's more like a note. So I am fascinated with the idea of general agreements because, like, you know, I wouldn't count Iceland like as a Scandinavian country. It's more something in between. You know, I think about general agreements because we can lose them soon. If people won't be organized enough to strike for the next general agreements and to negotiate more, if unions won't be prepared for negotiations, we can use the general agreements that are the basis, like this is the worst of the worst that the worker should have. So I would say that if I am losing general agreements that are equal for whole workers, like all workers in the country, we are using something that is a reference point for everybody. Like you cannot pay less, the conditions cannot be lower. And but then we are not prepared, as I said, the workers here are not organized, so they are not prepared for negotiations in every workplace when there is no general agreements that are global. So this is my note on that. I don't know if you want to comment.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I agree with you. And Sweden has a little special situation. And most of the, for example, Finland and Denmark and Norway, especially Finland and Norway, have a general collective agreements that kind of a set for example, a minimum wage as a law level that it's a violation of law if you go under in some certain branches or sometimes in a whole labor market. And in Sweden we don't have that, and there is an ongoing fight between the EU and the Swedish labor movement or labor organizations, where Sweden doesn't want EU to put the directive through the directive on the minimum wages because we have our system, and the European Union puts a lot of pressure on, okay, we have to be against social dumping and so on, so we have to put some measures that actually protect the right to minimum wage. And here I think that this is like all the time coming back to the same thing, which is that a lot of legislation is based on as like workers' rights are like juridified. I mean, it's a question of legal matters, not organizing anymore. The system with the collective agreements builds on some kind of collective or organizing power. You have to have the base of workers to actually to this system to have any power, any effect on the situation. So what we've seen in many unions all over the world, and especially also in Scandinavia and Sweden, it's that the organizing capacity, when I mean organizing, it's rank and file, actual collective organizing of solidarity between workers, has been going down and a lot of union activity has been very looks like insurance company most of the time, and what happens is that if unions don't manage to find some way to organize it again, for example, in Sweden, Sweden will have to introduce minimum wages that will, according to Swedish labor law experts, it's gonna have a bad effect on collective agreements, of the system of collective agreement. It will go more towards the regulation than actual collective regulation. So more law regulation than collective regulation of wages. So definitely it's a big fight to be taken in a union movement all over, and especially in Scandinavia. And it's one of the biggest questions that the unions have to solve right now, and asking themselves how we're going to do it, because we didn't manage. And here comes the questions of globalization, how to include platform workers, how to include irregular employments, how to include migrant workers. This is all questions that have to be addressed and solved in a way to, in order, if the union movement wants to survive and have their have some effect on the labor regulations.
Okay, thank you for these questions and comments. So now I would like to go to like a second round, and perhaps a bit quick, shorter speeches now. And I would like to focus in my questions more on the strategies. You already a bit introduced this in your speeches, but I would like to focus on the actual reactions of the workers' union. So first to Karol, you mentioned the tendency towards normalization of non-standard forms of employment, and even crowding out of unions by the state in this area. So is there any way you think trade unions can react, or maybe you saw in your research already that there are some good practices, so to say?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Of course, it's extremely difficult to give any specific advice, as this is largely sector and country dependent. But my general observation, my general, let's say, advice for a strategy is that as work becomes more non-standard, so should become the strategies of trade unions. And if we are looking at the gig economy, we see some limited successes of workers in terms of self-organization and let's say self-regulation in this area, and most of the successes of workers' movement in the area of gig economy, when we're looking in general at Europe, not even at a specific country, revolve around cooperation between more traditional forms of representation by formal unions and utilization of new forms of agency, such as grassroots unions, use of social media, use of platform cooperatives, or even unorthodox cooperation with employers' organizations. And here I can give a few examples. The first and probably the best example is Italy. In Italy, there are already at least 2 big collective agreements concluded for platform-based food delivery that were concluded as a result of combined pressure from grassroots informal unions and traditional unions who cooperated and complemented their strategies. Basically, how it looked like was that grassroots unions organized workers bottom-up and stimulated strikes and street activities, while traditional unions facilitated access to the government and employers' organizations. And as a result, workers on a regional platform, My Menu, and large international platform, Just Eat Takeaway, have won collective agreements that largely regularize their position. And at the same time, we have a very interesting development with government basically forcing other food delivery platforms to either conclude their own collective agreements. Otherwise, there will be an automatic opt-in into sectoral bargaining in the logistics sector, which still heavily improves the position of food delivery couriers. In other countries, we see, for instance, cooperations across traditional trade unions and associations of freelancers. This is, of course, a very problematic issue for trade unions. I am aware of that. And such cooperations were not particularly fruitful, to be honest. But we at least see that associations of freelancers can much more easily express their concerns and make demands in cooperation with trade unions. And here a good example can be cooperation in France between Union Indépendante and CFDT. Another interesting example is the UK. You've probably heard about publicly covered judgment by the Supreme Court that effectively reclassified Uber drivers. And this judgment happened as a result of a claim that was started by App Couriers and Drivers Union. This is an independent union that has a very interesting strategy of cooperation with law firms, facilitating representation of union members in seeking compensation from ride-hailing platforms for backdated holiday pay and unpaid minimum wage claims. You can enter a website of this union. There's a very interesting website where you can basically very easily start your claim against Uber. So here, like this union basically acts as a facilitator of access to justice. So you have a combination of, let's say, litigation strategies that the union has started, and basically, union acts as a facilitator of access to justice. There are numerous other examples that I could go on talking about, but I just want to stress one point, which may be obvious, that unions need to be very creative. Otherwise, there is a very high risk that the government will intervene and basically crowd out union involvement. And of course, some help and pressure from the government is sometimes essential, but I think that it's necessary to avoid relying too much on the government in terms of regulating and helping non-standard workers, as the risk is obvious, right? Some governments might be supportive of workers' rights, but the situation might change, and governments can become, let's say, agents of capital. And the second issue is, again, obvious, is that workers have to be able to defend themselves. And of course, there are limits to statutory regulation of employment conditions and position of workers within companies in general. So that's all for an answer. Thanks.
Perfect. Nice examples, very, very illustrative. Thanks a lot. And so now we turn to Daria. You mentioned a bit the role of migrant workers. So maybe you could elaborate a bit. How does the Swedish state treat migrants, and why this group could be an important part of the trade union movement?
Of course. Well, here there's a lot to say, but if I have to put it shortly, both the state and the union movement has not addressed migrant problems. We have, especially since the Eastern European countries joined the EU, we have a big amount of workforce coming from those countries to Sweden, and that is basically not talked about. So every year there's a lot of workplace accidents. There is media talks about exploitation, especially in the sectors of construction and agriculture and transport, and those are definitely things that are being talked about, but not really addressed when it comes to legislation. So that's, I think, a very interesting thing here. And since the problems were not addressed by the state, and it's the same thing with the major unions. The whole Swedish system, it is not really, it's really focused on regular employment forms. That's the one thing, and really didn't address any of this new flexible employment forms. And here we see a lot of migrants fall into the gray zone. So even the workers that are here legally, like European workers from Eastern European countries, kind of often fall outside of the social security, access to healthcare, access to unemployment insurance, and also access to their basic rights. And the bigger unions have not, and I can talk about the problems a lot when we're going to talk about solutions maybe also, but since this problem becomes more and more apparent, what the Swedish government is trying to do is trying to put some regulations on the third country migration. So in Sweden, any third country, a country from outside of European Union employer can actually invite a worker from other country with a visum. So what the government is trying to do is trying to actually limit the migration. But this comes to maybe 10,000 workers from the third countries, not outside of Europe. Well, while we have around 100,000 working from Europe, and those problems are not really addressed. But something is happening. Some things are. We're trying to talk about work-related crime and actually employer crime, which is good. But yet, not much happened. But what happened? The union that I'm working for, or like not working for, but I'm active in, actually managed to organize a lot of migrant workers. And here we talk about especially construction, transport, and agriculture. And here we are a smaller union, but what we do, it's something similar to what the United Voices of the World are doing. While a problem becomes very apparent and the major union organizations are not actually approaching in the right way, or don't manage to succeed there, when a smaller union actually does it, because we have hundreds of members who are migrants, who are really precarious workers, when a smaller union with less resources manages to organize this group, we hope it creates a snowball effect. Well, basically the other unions get worried, like, okay, how did they manage? Why they're doing this? They make us look bad, basically. So this is what we hope for in way of strategies. Just doing that work, trying to like Karol said, also find other ways of organizing. Try to adapt ways of organizing to the groups that need help with organizing, approaches in and how we do it, and find new ways. So that's for sure something that we're going to be working on. But when it comes to the government, I feel that this is not really talked about, which it's a big thing that in a way engages me in political work on that level, which is to raising those questions and finding also adequate legislation that actually works in that case.
Thanks, Daria. We have a question in chat from Gonzaga. Is the issue only concerned with migrants who are working in construction or agriculture? Would you mind sharing their socio-demographical status, like education, gender, or country of origin?
Of course. No, this is not only construction. We see a lot of migrants. If we talk about the biggest migrant groups, it's like I said, we have around 20,000 third country migrants with working visum. Half of them are usually qualified workers. So we talk about IT, management, or academia, and so on. Then another around 10,000, it's usually service work. It's bear picking in the Swedish forest, especially usually in the summer. These people usually come from from Thailand. Then we have quite a big group of construction and qualified workers, physical workers in that group. So in that 10,000. Then another around, we don't have a statistic really for that, but we estimate around, with few organizations who work with that question, around 100 to 200,000 workers from European Union. And then we have around few thousand of undocumented workers, for that include usually asylum seekers that didn't get, that are in hiding, and other third country members, that citizens that are here without documentation. And if it comes to the branches, it's mostly migrant work in the industries that are not very visible. So it's a lot of agriculture, definitely, and bear picking. Then we have mostly Eastern European women working in cleaning, mostly Eastern European men working in building, and a lot of people working in any transport sector. So a lot of, since the commerce has switched to online, and you buy a lot of things online, so this industry has grown a lot. So it's delivery, a lot of delivery workers also. So those are like the biggest sectors, I would say. And then of course we have restaurants and so on, which are also big, but not as big as the others.
Thanks, Daria, a lot. Oh, some echo. We have a question from, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. Okay, cool. We have a question from Karol about employer crime, but I would like to move to Michał and Anna so that they make it in time. So maybe Daria, you can respond in chat to Karol. Michał, coming back to Poland, your union is active not only in the private sector but also in the public one, which is a quite specific sector close to the government itself, right? So a part of the state, actually. So could you tell us about the situation of unions in the public sector, and is it a difficult area to act, or maybe a more easy one for unions like yours?
Mm-hmm. Although the public sector is much more unionized than the private sector, as you said, this doesn't always mean better working conditions. Public sector is the sector in which collective disputes are more frequent, and for example, teachers' strike 2 years ago was the biggest strike after political transformation in 1989. In our opinion, in opinion of our union, the reason for this is the inadequate regulation for strikes, exactly. Primarily, problematic is a lack of regulation on the general strike. Why? Because under Polish law, employees may engage in a collective dispute only against their employer, not against the authority, or not against whoever. For example, they should start collective dispute against an institution or a school, but not against the Minister of Education and so on. However, these units do not have any possibility to conclude any agreement changing working conditions, and strikes are therefore directed against national authorities, and but they are not subject to the rules on the negotiating. On the other hand, some groups of public sector employees, like civil servants, they are excluded from the right to strike. but yes, of course, this sector it's very high unionized. Sometimes in one institutions we got 5 or more trade unions, especially the 3 biggest unions: Solidarność, OPZZ, like Ogólnopolskie Porozumienie Związków Zawodowych, and Forum Związków Zawodowych, and sometimes a few unions from the branch, like in schools, the Union of Teachers, something like that. But I think that there is also a problem, like Anna said before in her presentation, like this all big unions, because they are big unions, have this problem that they more take care about about securing the vacations or something like that, but not they don't take care about organizing workers to correct the working conditions in the workplace. So what is the problem of public sector? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Michał, very much. So now we turn to Anna and to the Iceland again. You mentioned a bit of the structure of the power system, where we have large union and the government somehow working together. And could you tell us about the strategies of small trade unions, how they can position themselves in this scheme? What could be the strategies of independent unions?
Mm-hmm. So I'm very often saying that Iceland is a very good area for experiment for basically everything, because it's so small and so isolated that everything can happen in here, and then you can move it for a larger scale. And the same with union busting, because if you are a union outside of legal system of the unions, you can be a group of militant workers that decide to unionize and decide to use tools that are not so popular in this tradition of unionizing, or in this culture in general, like anarcho-syndicalism. And like, as IWW, we were organizing direct actions that were pushing for some changes. For example, we were, for the first 6 weeks when the COVID regulations were introduced, they weren't including students, people without documentations. They weren't including students that their permit to stay are related with the 40% of work that they have to do, for example, and then status of a student. So we were moaning a lot in the beginning, like, you don't have this regulation, you don't have this regulation, and that was changing. Then we were just organizing direct actions that were pushing the decision makers from the bigger unions to, for example, apply for something in the parliament, like fines for breaking the law for the employers, or fines for stealing the money that were from governmental programs, governmental supporting programs that were just stolen from the workers, or stolen wages with layoffs. But you can also use this opportunity to create a small union that is a yellow union that is created for worsening workers' condition. And we have this example of Wauer collapse. This is an aircraft that was declared as a bankrupt in 2019. And right now we have an afterglow of that because a new aircraft play was created, and around it there was a general agreement created with the union that was created out of nowhere, and it's not a part of ISC, it's not a legal union. It's called Íslenska Flugstétafélagit. So it's EFF. If you just Google EFF it's like complete, like everything is so dodgy there. And that union was created to just put up wages that are illegal, working conditions that are illegal in Iceland. This is the union created by this employer. The people that are chairmen and board members are just working for the play aircraft right now. So you've got all of those things. You can create a food bank when there is all the other food banks were closed because of COVID. So we were organizing in our Radical Social Center. One of our comrades was organizing weekly free supermarkets for people. So this is also something that union can do in pandemic. I think that's all. If you have any other questions, I'm leaving this 11 minutes to you.
Okay, thank you, Anna, very much. So now we have a few minutes left, perhaps for one or two questions. There is a question from Michał to Anna. Are there trade unions somehow linked to the parties present in the parliament? So is it the question? Is that union movement?
Yeah. I think. Okay, unmuted. Great question. Thank you. On the 25th of September, we had parliamentary voting. And if you heard that there is a majority of women in the Icelandic parliament, it's not. That was only the first counting of votes. So a weird thing happened because the chairman of one of the biggest unions was a candidate for the parliament. Which is not illegal, which creates a lot of questions, because I think personally that being a chairman of the biggest union in the country, it's more important than being an MP. But in general, if we are discussing general agreements that are the basis of Icelandic labor law, you have to negotiate them between the association of like ISC, so Association of the Trade Unions, Association of Employers, and government. So the government is in this triangle. But if we are talking about Icelandic government, who will win those parliamentary voting is Independence Party. So the party of extremely rich people, business owners, that will always take a side of employers, never of the workers, and that's never gonna change. So I've got those two. Like maybe the labor unions wants to intervene and wants to have better of a saying, more of a saying in the government, which was happening until the 80s. In the 80s, labor unions had a space in Icelandic parliament, and they were also making decisions there. So maybe this is an answer.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions either from the participants or from the audience? This is the last call. And Daria is explaining the employer crime quite broadly here in the chat for those of you who are interested. Just try to share my experience again, maybe not the word, because the power and I was actually making some notes.
Maciej, you are talking from the other planet. Like it's unrecognizable.
We didn't hear anything what you said.
So maybe while Maciej is having problems with communication, I would like to point out that this is so important that we are meeting together, that there is something like a phenomena of Polish organizers in many countries outside of Poland. Maybe because of Polish migration is such a big issue and such a big one in many countries in Scandinavia and in the in America and in the West. And this is something very important, and also that we can share our experiences with each other. Like with Daria, we have a long communication already, and we got to know each other in 2019. But maybe this is something that we should discuss on, because this is one of the areas that Polish migration can be used, and Polish like experience of Polish migrants can be used in the labor market, but also maybe with the situation on the borders. So that would be my conclusion.
That's a good note. That we should probably use the knowledge and experience of migrants in organizing our own labor market, which still struggles. Good idea.
Yeah, and since I mean, both there is of course different country. Every country has their own situation, but you know, the last week we had visitors from the Amazon Union here talking about their international strategies, and what I took with me from that meeting was that, of course, like in a globalized world, even more than ever, there is a need of international, not only solidarity but strategies to find a way to fight back the changes and the development, and fight for the rights of the workers. So that's very inspiring, and this whole fantastic forum and meeting you guys. So it's great.
Maciej is still struggling. I don't know if he will manage to close the meeting. We still have like 4 minutes. But maybe if we have voice, thank you, Maciej, for organizing this event for us, to gather us together and to plan this discussion. That was very interesting, and for me, it's very important to share those experiences from the past 5 years for me, from migration and from organizing. But I think also for the listeners and for the other participants. I think we have to conclude this meeting because Maciej is just disappearing. Oh, okay. I hear you.
One final try. Can you hear me now or no? Yes?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I do hope as well that you enjoyed the panel despite the problems, but perhaps the problems were only on my side, the technical ones. So just to sum up, because the topic of our panel was lessons learned, and I was making some notes, and I would like to just remind some quotes which of our great speakers. So these are very interesting quotes. So first, even in collective agreement system, you need to have organizing power to burgeon in this system. Second, as work becomes more standard, so should become the strategies of trade unions. They need to be very creative if they don't want governments to crowd out their activities. Third, rights of migrant workers have not been addressed by governments or major trade unions. When a smaller union with less resources manages to organize the migrant group, we hope it creates a snowball effect. Fourth, big unions often take care of social security or vacations, but not of organizing the workers. And finally, Anna underlined the role of direct bottom-up actions like providing an independent food bank. So thanks a lot for these general conclusions, but also for many very concrete examples of unions' initiatives and many good inspirations for our both action and research. Yeah, and thanks a lot, and I hope to see you soon on some other occasions. And that's all.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.